means bringing the most powerful stakeholders to the table to become better informed.
Tonight, Trump's criminal trial gets underway, the first of its kind for a former U.S. president. We're at the courthouse. Then, tornado threats in the plains and Midwest. And on Jackie Robinson Day, a call to get more African-American players back in the game on the CBS Evening News.
Iran launched an unprecedented aerial attack against Israel, and we mounted an unprecedented military effort to defend Israel.
Donald Trump is inside a courtroom for the start of his hush money trial.
Yeah, he's the first former president in U.S. history to stand trial in a criminal case.
This is political persecution. This is a persecution like never before. Nobody's ever seen anything like it.
Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. We're following historic developments with serious implications for the 2024 presidential election. The start of former President Donald Trump's hush money trial and President Biden's response to the growing tensions in the Middle East. On that note, the president said today the U.S. and its allies defeated Iran's unprecedented weekend attack on Israel. The Israel Defense Forces say nearly all of the more than 300 missiles and drones fired at the country were intercepted. Meanwhile, in Lower Manhattan today, the process of seating a 12-person jury in Donald Trump's hush money case began. This is the first criminal trial of a former president in U.S. history. Trump has pleaded not guilty to 34 counts of falsifying business records tied to payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels. Robert Costa and Weijia Jiang are all following these developments, but we will begin with Robert, who joins us now from outside that courthouse in New York City, where the court has just adjourned for today. Bob, good to see you. So the former president spoke at the courthouse earlier today. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
That I'm not in Georgia or Florida or North Carolina campaigning like I should be. It's perfect for the radical left Democrats. That's exactly what they want. This is about election interference. That's all it's about.
So, Bob, that was Trump after everything ended today. And I know you've been reporting throughout this process about how the former president uses his appearances in court to try to get his message out to voters. I'm curious, you've been outside that courthouse all day. I know you've been talking to the Trump campaign as well. What is the strategy here through that statement?
Good to be with you, Caitlin. So the takeaway here from the end of day one of former President Trump's criminal trial is that he's trying as hard as he can to combat the judge here in terms of motions, Judge Juan Merchan. But Merchan keeps pushing back against Trump and his legal team. Just a few minutes ago, the judge said Trump's not going to be able to attend the Supreme Court hearing on immunity in late April. And he is moving quickly to try to get through this jury selection process. But it's evident by this jury selection process that happened today that it might take some time to get a jury pool that's sufficient and accepted by both the prosecution and the defense team. Many jurors, potential jurors, dismissed today because they were not able to be seen as impartial when it comes to former President Donald Trump. So this is the beginning of a process.
Yeah, and it's expected to be a long one as well. I mean, the process of that's just startling what you just said there, that there were so many potential jurors that said that they couldn't be impartial here. That just adds to the challenges. Bob, I'm wondering if you can kind of take us to where you are right now. And I know you've been out there since the early hours of this morning. We talked at the beginning about just how unprecedented this is. I know we use that word a lot, but this is a historic day in terms of the first time a former president has been standing criminal trial.
The scene out here in Lower Manhattan is full of protesters, some supporting former President Trump, others opposed to him. There are curious onlookers, many police officers, NYPD, Secret Service personnel. It's a bit of a tense scene at times here, but relatively calm. This is something that's happened a lot here in Lower Manhattan. Trump has faced a civil fraud trial just down the street. He has faced constant legal challenges here in the state of New York, dealing with the Attorney General Letitia James, now dealing with the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. So this area of New York is used to this sort of thing. They're used to the footprint of a former president coming to this area, this neighborhood.
We mentioned this kind of balance between the courtroom and the campaign. Donald Trump was on the campaign trail over the weekend in the battleground state of Pennsylvania. I want to play a little of what he said.
The entire world will witness the commencement of the very first Biden trial. They're all Biden trials, you know that, right? And I'm proud to do it for you. Have a good time watching.
So you have that statement, then you also have Trump advisor Jason Miller posting this on social media, and it's essentially a screenshot of all of the coverage that this trial beginning today is getting here. And I'm curious if the Trump campaign thinks that this benefits his campaign, or if there is some underlying concern here and the idea that the former president will have to spend weeks in Manhattan.
Well, no one's arguing it helps Trump to be off the campaign trail during the beginning of a general election campaign against President Biden. Does it stoke the grievances of his longtime supporters who see him as a perceived victim of the political and legal establishment? Perhaps it does, as so many of these legal issues seem to do for Trump on social media and at his rallies. But logistically speaking, this is a political impediment. It takes Trump off the trail. He's frustrated. In court today, our great reporters, Katrina Kaufman, Graham Cates, inside the courtroom, inside the overflow room, watching as Trump at times closed his eyes, dipped his head in visible frustration, maybe apathy about what's happening. He's tried to dismiss this trial in so many ways. I was with him on Friday at Mar-a-Lago in Florida, and he said jury selection's the luck of the draw. He said he's also willing to testify, but all that's now down the line. This jury selection process could take 2 or 3 weeks, and Trump is going to be mandated to be in court. Just a few minutes ago, as he wrapped up the first day, Judge Juan Merchan said Trump must be in this courtroom all the time because it's a criminal trial and it's serious business.
Serious business indeed. The first time we've ever seen such a thing. Bob Costa, thank you so much for your time and reporting. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we're going to switch gears here. The White House officials say that Iran clearly intended to cause destruction and casualties when it attacked Israel over the weekend. The U.S. shot down more than 70 Iranian drones involved in the attack. Weijia Jiang joins us now from the White House. Weijia, good to see you. Thanks for being here. So President Biden spoke at length today about the attack during his meeting that he had today with Iraq's prime minister. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Iran launched an unprecedented aerial attack against Israel, and we mounted an unprecedented military effort to defend Israel. Together with our partners, we defeated that attack.
So, Weijia, from what you've gathered reporting at the White House today, how extensive was the U.S.'s involvement here in defending Israel against these attacks?
Caitlin, the U.S. was incredibly involved in the deterrence effort here, shooting down not only the 70 drones that you mentioned, but a total of 300 drones and missiles, which is exactly why the administration is saying this was a complete and utter failure on Iran's part. And to your point earlier, they said that because there were so many attempts here with drones and various kinds of missiles being sent over to Israel, that's why they say it is so undeniable that Iran meant to do damage. And the White House categorically denied any claims or theories that Iran didn't actually meant to do any damage here or harm, that they were just trying to perhaps send a domestic message that they would not allow the attack on its consulate in Damascus, Syria, go unanswered. And so this was a huge effort from the U.S. and Israel and other allies in preparation for ultimately what was not a very impactful assault by Iran.
And what has the White House been telling you about what the U.S.'s response to the attack signals to Iran?
Well, I asked John Kirby today in the White House briefing about, that very question, and he focused a lot about what we just talked about, which is what the U.S. did as the attack was happening. Take a listen.
President Biden issued a warning to Iran, don't, and now the U.S. is not
taking any part in an Israeli reprisal. So does that signal to Iran that it can defy the U.S. without facing any consequences?
I don't know, man. If I'm sitting in Tehran and I'm taking a look at what just happened on Saturday night, I don't think I'd be betting that the United States is not willing to get engaged here and help defend Israel. I mean, you had American fighter pilots in the air, in combat operations, shooting down drones and missiles that were heading towards Israel.
And so I ask that because the U.S., CBS has made clear to Israel that if there is a reprisal or retaliation for this Iranian strike, the U.S. will not be involved. And so you heard what Kirby had to say about why not. And I did follow up and say, yes, I hear everything that you're saying about deterrence as the attack was happening. But what I'm asking about is consequences after the fact, especially since President Biden warned Iran, don't do this. And Kirby went on to say that the U.S. is working with international allies and partners to determine what is the appropriate consequence for Iran. Caitlin?
And Weija, on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, you have House Speaker Mike Johnson saying he's going to be pushing for aid to Israel this week. What does the White House want Congress to do on this issue?
Well, the White House wants lawmakers to pass the entire national security supplemental bill, which includes funding not only for Israel, but for Ukraine, for border security, for those countries in the Indo-Pacific like Taiwan. And today, the White House, during that briefing, the press secretary said the White House does not support a standalone piece of legislation that would only give money to Israel. So that was pretty significant, Caitlin, because it looks like that big package that they are hoping to push through somehow isn't going anywhere. And so some would argue that it's better to give Israel aid instead of waiting for all those pieces to come together. But again, the White House says the president would not support that.
It'll be interesting to see how they piece together a coalition on this. Weija Jiang, thank you very much for your reporting. We appreciate it. It's good to see you.
You too.
And speaking of foreign policy, we have some new polling on Americans' views on foreign policy. CBS News Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us next to break down some of those numbers. You're streaming America Decides.
Mr. President, there's a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about.
Does this carrier strike group stand ready?
Just incredible to see there's an active search and rescue operation going on 12 hours after this accident.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Stories start with the who, what, when, and where. But it's why it's important to you that matters most. Knowing what to ask is how you open the door to a deeper understanding. See you on Primetime, streaming free everywhere.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That Desired Farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
New CBS polling is showing how memories of the Cold War impact how Americans feel about the war between Russia and Ukraine. 36% of people between the ages of 18 and 49 view Moscow as an ally. That number drops to just 20% for people aged 50 and older who grew up during that conflict. Let's bring in CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, to break this all down for us. Anthony, good to see you. We appreciate it. It's fascinating, this generational divide that we're seeing here, and it's really informative. We're 2 years removed from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Break down how Americans are feeling about this war at this point.
How you doing, Caitlin? Well, yeah, it starts with this. Your basic split on should the U.S. supply weapons and aid to Ukraine, and it's a pretty tight split. But when you look a little closer, well, here's what really stands out. People who think that that aid would be effective at stopping Russian military action in Europe are way more likely to support U.S. aid to Ukraine. So that in turn leads me to think, well, what shapes your views on Russia, right? And that leads to that chart you just showed at the top, where people are more likely to consider Russia an enemy of the United States if they're older, over age 50 in this case. So I wondered, well, is that a function of having grown up or experienced more of the Cold War, right, through the 1980s? Well, sure enough, when I asked people, did the U.S. win the Cold War? Looking back on it, yeah, as you might expect, more people over age 50 in this case think the U.S. won, and there's more people who say flat out that they don't remember well enough if they're under 50, or that the U.S. neither won nor lost. Okay, well, how does that then connect up? Well, take a look at this. If you think the U.S. won the Cold War, and we know that that tends to be people who are a little bit older, that in turn connects with a higher percentage of people who say now the U.S. should send aid to Ukraine. So that connection about how you feel about Russia, whether you see it as an enemy, whether you think this will be effective in stopping Russia, and then looking back, how your views got formed on it, in part, whether you think the U.S. won the Cold War. And I'm going to have one little coda here, if I can. When I ask people then, okay, if you think the U.S. won the Cold War, what president did the most to win out of those presidents during it? Well, far and away, the number one answer there is Republican President Ronald Reagan. And the reason I think that is important is when you look today and you see a lot of these party splits where the Republicans are split with a majority, slight majority, so 61%, saying the U.S. should not aid Ukraine. You look a little closer, and it's older Republicans who are actually more likely to be in favor, and that defines part of the Republican Party split today, Caitlin.
Yeah, and that's been something that has been defining this issue heading into the election as well. Another issue that involves a generational divide is how younger Americans are feeling about the current conflict in Gaza. I'm curious, this seems like an issue that President Biden is going to have to really deal with heading into the election. What did you find here?
Indeed. And I'm going to scroll to this slide since you brought up generational or at least age differences. Well, Joe Biden's overall approval rating and his approval rating on handling the conflict between Israel and Hamas are down from February among those in the age 18 to 29 bracket. You look at these drops, right? From 55 to 43 overall, and that coincides with a drop from 51 to 40 on handling Israel and Hamas. And there, I think this is important because his overall approval rating from all age groups is also down on handling Israel and Hamas from 38 to 33. So that's had a negative effect. And you get this, the public saying increasingly that they want Biden to call on Israel to stop military actions in Gaza. One extra wrinkle here, Caitlin, and that is this. You get people who say that they're sympathetic, and a lot of people say they're sympathetic with the Israeli people, right? That's a big majority. But you also see increasing numbers of Democrats in particular who say that they are also sympathetic with the Palestinian people. So some of that between young people and between Democrats giving those responses, as well as saying they're less likely to support aid to Israel. And some of that pressure and that downward pressure on his numbers are coming from his own party's base, Caitlin.
Yeah, and he's absolutely going to need every member of his base to turn out in this election. They've been sending messages through the primaries about this issue. I want to drill down a little bit on what you mentioned, too, about, asking whether the U.S. should be pushing Israel to increase military action in Gaza. Can you dig a little bit deeper into those findings?
Yeah, sure. So take a look at this. Here are, what should we do, right? What should Biden be pressuring Israel to do? First, that number goes from 31 to 37% who say Biden should be calling on Israel to stop military actions, okay? Now, the other part of this, if I scroll over here, is take a look, and I mentioned this earlier, about how Democrats feel about sending weapons and aid and supplies. That's down from 47 to 32. So that's a big part of it. There is one other wrinkle here. Do people think that the administration is doing all it can to get American hostages home? And he's got a majority who feel that the administration, the U.S., could be doing more. All of that is keeping that sort of downward pressure on his approval ratings for that issue, Caitlin.
Interesting what kind of impact this has on his overall approval ratings. Anthony Salvanto, thank you very much. Very illuminating. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Another concern for President Biden is his approval rating among younger voters. Ahead, we'll hear from some of those voters on why they're bailing on the president. You're streaming America Decides.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else.
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered. There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original, 48 Hours, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
This is CBS.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. New CBS polling shows President Biden's approval rating has dipped among younger Americans. 43% of Americans aged 18 to 29 approve of the president's performance, and that's down from 55% in February. CBS News campaign reporter Torian Small joins us from Boone, North Carolina. Torian, I know you've been reporting on how younger voters are viewing this election. Historically, Democratic candidates do well with younger voters, tend to win them over, but Biden appears to be slipping here. From what you can tell, what's behind this decline?
Yeah, some of the same things that Anthony Savanto also mentioned today. A real sticking point is the president's handling of the Israel-Hamas war. A lot of folks that I talked to today say that they're looking for him to be a little bit more aggressive in calls for ceasefire, not just for a temporary pause for humanitarian relief, but also something a little bit more permanent. They're willing to draw a line in the sand, but I often ask, when is the pivot point? Is this something to the young voters that I talked to today, is this something that they're willing to take to November? A few of them said they're still on the fence. A lot of them are vehemently against Donald Trump, but they're not sure if their dislike for Donald Trump overweighs this moral dilemma that they're facing as it relates to the Israel-Hamas war.
That's really interesting. That's such an important question heading into November is, do they show up at all? I know you've been speaking with a lot of young voters, as you mentioned. What else are they telling you about their opinions of President Biden?
Well, age is a big problem for a lot of these young voters. And, the irony wasn't lost on the North Carolina Democratic State Party chair, who happens to be the youngest state party chair in the U.S. She said, listen, everyone knows that this is the oldest U.S. presidential candidate in the oldest U.S. presidential race. But she says for her, his policies are really young, or at least connects with more young progressive Democrats, which is why she's on the front lines really doing the heavy lifting for him, going to colleges like Appalachia State, where I'm at right now, talking to voters here, really engaging with them for the president, because she does believe, and she told me this, that representation matters, but she's also pointing to races down the ballot as proof of that. She says, listen, at the city, township level, you have a bunch of young folks, including the youngest mayor pro tem right now that was elected back in 2021. He's representative of many of those students, and she's saying you can still be a Democrat and support an older presidential candidate because he's lifting up some of those down ballot races.
That's really interesting, kind of down the ticket there. I mean, especially in a place like North Carolina, which is not as big of a battleground as some of the others, but a battleground nonetheless. What's been the Biden-Harris campaign strategy in North Carolina, if any? Yeah,
well, in 2020, Biden lost the state by around 70,000 votes. The campaign tells me that they're seeing some increases in changing demographics, more Democrats moving to the states where they think that this will be absolutely a state in play, partly because the governor's race is also on the ballot, and it's, a highly contentious race. You have the current lieutenant governor going up against the current attorney general. And that's really what's been the lightning rod here to gather folks around. But they're really targeting young voters here, taking advantage of the really expansive UNC college system here. Biden and Harris have both made stops to various colleges looking to recruit and engage young voters there, but also bring them into the Democratic Party. It goes beyond just getting them to vote. They want them to actively be a part of the coalition here and make sure that young voters not just encourage other young voters to participate and vote, but to also at some point become an elected official in their own right.
Yeah, that matters a lot for what exactly you were just talking about, those smaller, more local offices to get people to run for. Torian Small, our Battleground State reporter, we thank you very much for your time reporting. And we are learning that House Speaker Mike Johnson has signed articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. House impeachment managers will deliver the articles to the Senate tomorrow. House Republicans impeached Mayorkas in February on 2 articles for not enforcing immigration laws. And that does it for us today, but we'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes